Okay, it's about time to begin our Bible class this morning. We're in a study of Christians in the workplace, and we are going to be discussing discouragement this morning, but just a quick overview of where we've been. We started with the three foundational lessons of God's viewpoint of our work, our viewpoint of working unto God, not man, and then other people's viewpoint in setting godly examples. And then the box over to the left, we talked about issues and with achievement and success, and that was pride and competition, materialism, misplaced priorities. And again, this morning we'll be talking about discouragement, and then bitterness and resentment on Wednesday, and then we'll move over to the far right with workplace temptations and challenges, dealing with lying and integrity, corporate peer pressure, women in the workplace. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. And then stress and anxiety. Originally, bitterness and resentment were first in this two-lesson series, and I changed it just based on studying. I felt like that maybe bitterness and resentment were the next step after discouragement, so I thought we'd start with discouragement. Christians aren't immune from adversity in the workplace. We dedicate a large amount of our time, maybe more time than most things in our work, and it would be natural for us to face adversity in the workplace. But thankfully there are many passages in the Bible that encourage us and would help prevent us from being discouraged. One that comes to mind is in Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. Have I not commanded you, be strong and of good courage, do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And I think the question is, we have all these passages, but do we really believe it? And I wish that we could almost take a snapshot of David's Lord's Supper discussion and Daniel's lesson and put them together. I think we'd have our class on discouragement right there. I think a big part of what Daniel said, that key word of trust. Do we trust in the Lord to help us when we face adversity in the workplace? I want to keep this approach that I've been following where we define what these terms are, we diagnose what some of the symptoms are associated with these terms, adversity and discouragement, and then identify some steps or some practical application where we can put together a plan to defend ourselves or protect others. So these are the definitions. If you just did a Google search, the first one under adversity there, a state or instance of continuous difficulty. But if you look at the word adversity in the Bible and its meaning, it says affliction, anguish, distress, tribulation, and trouble. And then discouragement, the lack of confidence or enthusiasm for something or misfortune, just if you looked it up in a dictionary. But in the Bible, it's to break down by violence or fear or to beat down. And I felt like those biblical definitions were almost a little bit more severe, a little bit more deep than the Google or Webster's definition of those. And so words are important, and the meanings of those words are important. That words make up sentences, sentences make up discourse. Discourse moves people. It motivates people. It can turn things around. And so I think it's important for us to know what the meaning of the word was back in the Bible, because today, if those words don't have that same deep meaning, maybe we're not getting the message that we need to get. So I'm going to go with the second definition on both of those for the most part as far as our meaning in this class. So let's move to the diagnosis aspect of adversity. What adversities can cause discouragement in the workplace or school? Yes, sir.
Well, at this point, I think I would look to the worldly discouragement. Perhaps you're not advancing in your employment, been passed up for a promotion, you're struggling in settling into a new job. In school, your grades are not what you want them to be, or maybe you failed a class. Those are the type of physical discouragements and adversities you experience in the workplace. And then that can percolate over into the spiritual.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those that you said there are right on track. Yes, sir.
People. There they are, people. People can, because of how most people are, and loving to complain, loving to get upset, they love chaos, blah, 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 blah. You can let that rub off on you in your workplace. And so people can be one of the biggest discouragements that you're with every day just because of their attitudes.
It can wear you down. And most of those people are discouraged people in and of themselves that are bringing other people down. And I think that's an important takeaway. What you said there is you can just wear people down. You can wear friends down to where they're not your friends. You can wear your family down. You can wear people down with adversity and how you handle discouragement. Anybody else? Okay. Yes.
Yeah, depending on the workplace that you're in, you can also have people actively making fun of you and wearing you down from a, if you keep doing what you think you need to be doing, that you'll just get tired and eventually, either stop talking or change your behavior.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, and we're going to talk a little bit about where adversity can take us to things beyond discouragement. So excellent point. Some of the things that I had down are the same things that were mentioned here, the poor test grades if you're in school. Just getting a sorry professor, though and I hope maybe there are, I'm not trying to offend any professors that may be here because there are some really good ones out there, so come away with that. But if you get a sorry professor that has a reputation and you just know they are and you've got them, sometimes that's an adversity there. Not getting a position, a teacher's assistant position, or things that you can use when you have so little to put on your resume, that to have those things in such competition, internships, things like that could be an adversity if those aren't available to you. Maybe it's just the mounting school loans. A big financial adversity out there is a big issue. That not just at school, but even in our jobs. If we're just not making enough money to cover what maybe we even feel like God's expectation is for us to be somewhat self-sufficient and take care of our family and maybe even to share some with others. That can be adversity. Downsizing on the job, mergers. Merger is a nice term. I worked for a company where we went through about 4 or 5 mergers in about 5 or 6 years, and what that means is not that we're merging and we're going to cooperate. It means there's a more dominant company and there's a less dominant company, and there's going to be people that are going to go. And so jobs go in those situations. Maybe your job is outsourced, which sounds nice. It doesn't sound as bad as it is, but that's giving somebody else your job. So just in the workforce, it can be difficult. Confrontational coworkers, disrespectful staff personnel, disrespectful supervisors, lack of appreciation by the company, not enough resources to do the job, sorry assignments, not enough hours or money. So all kinds of adversity that we can encounter in the workplace and at school. So the next question is, how can discouragement manifest itself or reflect itself in our behavior? Isn't that what, when you see people that are discouraged and they're complaining about it, isn't that what they're looking for? Get on the discouragement train, get on the complain train? Yeah, exactly. Yes, sir.
I think it can wear on you like an infection or a cancer. It's corrosive to the soul. I know it, like my career has had very happy and non-stressful times, and then some years that were very stressful. And I look back and it really weighed on me. I remember one of our old secretaries sent us a picture from years ago of me and her standing there, and she thought it was fun. It was like, look at us years ago. And all I saw was a sad man dying inside. I was like, man, that was a rough year. I'm glad I got away from that group. But man, it's like, how many of us in this room have had a point in our career where it was just a really tough year, I know I'm not alone in saying that. That's why I make that joke. Yeah.
If you haven't been through a tough year, then you haven't lived long enough, for sure. Yes, sir.
A lot of times, I guess from my own experience, sometimes when things get real stressful, you can carry that with you for, you can carry it home, and then it can start to affect your behavior in other area, how you treat your family or how you treat other people, just because you're carrying like stress, you're so worried about things that are not going right, or whatever deadline and all this, if you're struggling, that adversity, just the constant struggle, it can kind of wear you down if you let it. Again, if we dial back a couple lessons, the misplaced priorities can factor into that too. That's why you're so stressed, is because you care so much about that thing that shouldn't matter so much, maybe, so they're all kind of tied together in that way sometimes.
Yeah, excellent point. When I was preparing for this, it's kind of like a thread on a sweater where you start pulling it, and all these things are interrelated. You pull it, and the answer to all these things is the same answer. And when I was talking to Michelle, I said, I'm going to get up there and I'm going to say the same thing for a number of class periods, because the end result, it's the same answer, basically. So yes, they're all interrelated. Anybody else have a comment on that question? These were some of the things that I came up with, and most of the things we mentioned here were on the negative aspect of it. Passive-aggressive behavior, depression, bitterness, disrespect, stress, misplaced priorities, anxiety, blame. You hear a lot of people blame, either blaming God for their situation or themselves for their situation, and then just self-esteem issues after you've been beat down. But nobody mentioned anything positive that could come out of adversity or discouragement. And there are a lot of positive things. We have a lot of positive examples. Reliance upon God. You look at Job, we'll look at him in a little bit more detail in a moment, but growth and maturity, character development, resilience, perseverance, sympathy or empathy, conviction, patience, hope, and just mental or spiritual toughness. When you're in a sport and you practice should be difficult. It should be adversity. And why is that? Because on game day, you want to know that you can make it through the game, right? That you have the knowledge and you have the physical capability to make it through the game. But you can see why that it's important to try to, one, defend against discouragement, but also be able to manage it, be able to turn it around and make it a character development type positive aspect of our life. And we know we're going to face adversity, but here's the question. Does God want us to face discouragement? There's adversity out there, but does He want us to face discouragement?
One thing I was thinking after I finished the Lord's Supper talk is this line that occurred to me that, it's okay to feel unworthy, but be careful not to feel worthless. All of us are unworthy. None of us are worthless. So when you get discouraged, I think someone mentioned, I think Daniel mentioned this coming into the new year with cynicism. The trials of life can make you into a hardened cynic, and you feel so discouraged, you're rendered sort of incapacitated as a vibrant Christian to serve in God's kingdom, because you have inward-focused thoughts of what's failing or what's not right or what's wrong, and He doesn't want you to be discouraged. He wants you to flourish. So it's okay to be unworthy, but don't feel worthless.
Yeah, you may be discouraged, but He doesn't want us to stay in a state of discouragement. It's kind of like be angry but sin not. We're going to get angry, but the whole point is there to manage it so that we don't sin. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 5, it says, "And have you forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons? My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by Him." So just his view on discouragement is not to be discouraged whenever we face adversity or to stay in a state of discouragement. What would happen to a person who stayed in a state of a discouragement? Yeah, and that's the end point, right? Defeat. If you stay in that, you'll eventually hit those other levels that we'll look at here in a minute till you're defeated. Yes, sir.
We get depressed and everything else and just lose, not go to worship the Lord or forget about the Lord and just
Shut down.
Just go and shut down.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
The Bible is clear. Scripture speaks about the troubles and woes of this life almost as much as it does about salvation. And in the first or second epistle of Peter, I can't remember which, he's talking about the sufferings, and he says you're being tested. And the test of it's a testing of our faith, which proves our faith, which brings God's approval as we remain faithful. So we see the Apostle Paul, and all of this falls into the general category of tribulation. We can have tribulations because of illness or health problems or the workplace. Just put it all in that general category of tribulations. And what does Paul say? Count it all joy when you encounter various tribulations. So 3 words that God tells us about that which we suffer in this life. First of all, Jesus was perfected by the things he suffered, Hebrews 2:10, and in James chapter 1 about the second and third verse, we are perfected by the things that we suffer. So God doesn't tell us, I'm going to take you out of these things. He tells us to persevere, to endure, and to overcome. And he who overcomes receives the kingdom.
Yeah, so there are no participation trophies in Christianity, right? We're not going to get the trophy. We're not going to get the reward. We're going to have to work for it. Yes, sir.
Without difficulty, there's no growth. I mean, if everything was just hunky-dory and everything was rolling along great, what impetus would you have to perfect and to transform and to go to God? Lead him, everything's great, you know. So you've got to learn from the difficulties, and they're put there to help you grow. This life's not going to be perfect. I mean, we're told that repeatedly in the scriptures. But part of the transformation will come from getting out of the discouragement, going towards the encouragement, getting out of the gloominess, going towards the light. That's the only way we get there. Otherwise, we would have no impetus to get there.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit next week in the bitterness and resentment phase of that. A lot of the reasons behind facing adversity is just to get our attention to be reliant upon the Lord. I mean, that's what he was trying to do to the children of Israel wandering in the desert. Be reliant upon me. Not because I'm narcissistic or because I need it, but because there's stability in me, whereas if you're putting your faith in materialism, these other priorities that are out there, yeah, you may have some solid steps along the way, but there is nothing solid in the long term about focusing on those things. So if we never faced adversity, there would not be progress, really. And if you'll just placate me here a little bit to cover a couple of 3 secular examples, if Ford had failed and quit, we never would have the Ford Motor Company, who failed a number of times along the way, declared bankruptcy a number of times along the way, but what a huge impact with the assembly line on his failures there in making that the standard for automobile production. Michael Jordan, I'm not a huge basketball fan, but when I was reading this, I thought, wow, he didn't make the high school basketball team. He got cut from the high school basketball team. He missed more than 9,000 shots in his career, lost 300 games. 26 times he was entrusted with the game-winning shot and missed. And his comment on his career was, I failed over and over again, and that's why I succeed. So those opportunities that were adverse, he turned those into positive things. And then the last thing here we're probably all familiar with, Abraham Lincoln lost 8 elections before he was ever elected president. And he is, on every poll that comes out, by far the #1 president that the United States has ever had. So the key really is to know how to respond to adversity. Are we going to let it get us better or get us bitter? And that's the decision we have to make. So the next question I had up here, is it a sin to be in a state of discouragement? And we kind of talked about that. I think to be in a state of discouragement so that you're bringing other people down and letting it go to the next level, I believe that is a sin, so I won't spend much time on that, but it will wear people down. I put this together just based on pulling some things, and it made sense to me, and I'm good with pictures. If you look at the base of the pyramid, it starts with disappointment. So really, that should kind of be the shot across the bow there, is how do we handle disappointments? Do we let it get us to the next level of discouragement? And then do we let that get us to the next level of bitterness and resentment? And then to depression and defeat. The higher you get up in that pyramid, the more difficult it is to turn around. And the more we may need help from the outside to turn around. Something that, when you talk about depression, that can turn into a medical thing. And we're not immune from that. And if somebody's just defeated, can you think of, and I kind of struggled with this, I have one example of where either a person or people were just defeated, just knocked out of the game. Yeah, that was what I came up with. I think they started with disappointment from the day they left. From the why did you bring us out of here? We were a lot better off there, to the discouragement phase where they were complaining. And remember one of the first instances where they were really complaining, and it wasn't God's fault, it was their fault. What did God do? He sent something, snakes. I'm not a fan of snakes, but I would turn around at that point, I think, on the discouragement scale. And then it moved to bitterness and resentment in their conduct and in their verbiage. And then just depression, and then just flat out defeat and having to wander the wilderness for 40 years.
Pyramid is reversed. I think the top is the disappointment, because that's normally the smallest. And then as you go down each step, it gets bigger, it gets more entrenched. And so then the discouragement becomes a little bit bigger, and then the bitterness and resentment are a little bit bigger. Depression can set in, and then you're totally defeated. So I'd say that's almost, pyramid shape is fine, but I think the words serve better if you flip them. As opposed to defeat being the pinnacle, defeat is the bottom, and it holds you down there.
All right, that took me a long time to put that pyramid together, I'm telling you. It wasn't like I just got the picture. I had to, PowerPoint, get a line and another line. I had to make them meet up. And I couldn't, yeah, there you go. I was disappointed. Well, thank you, I appreciate that. And I couldn't get disappointment in that little cone. So if you could clear your comments with me before I get up here, that would be helpful. It would be very helpful. I appreciate that. No, point well taken, though. I like that. Yes.
To sadly put people inside of my head, if you look at that as an arrow, I know in past classes, Daniel's had pyramids and how we grow stronger towards God. If you look at that as a directional arrow tip, it's leading you towards slavery to Satan. And other pyramids that we've had where we talk about you're a slave to God, which one do we want to be? This one just leads you to be fodder for Satan and to have his way with you. In other spiritual pyramids that we've seen, we grow stronger, we become that much more vigilant. And I think of your examples, your secular examples, probably those three folks there was two that I remember, I can't remember the third one, but knew within them they had it. There wasn't a defeat. With adversity in our spiritual life, we have something that Satan is trying to take away from us. We have salvation. We have the opportunity to be with God. In this world, Satan is just going to continue to try to knock that football out of our hands and cause us to fumble, to borrow a horrible analogies du jour kind of thing. But I was looking at it, and I think if you just look at it as an arrow in direction, it leads towards Satan.
I like that perspective, Albert. That's good. It all works. I even saw some where, like you said, it was turned upside down and it was pointing down and it was a wedge, and that, wedges you, it separates you from people. So that's probably more along the lines of what you're stating. Yes.
Not to dwell on this slide too long, I just think there's so many great points to make on this, but I'm always interested whenever modern day psychology starts to tap in organically to biblical concepts, but they're not attempting to. This pyramid here is actually something that's discussed quite a bit. In fact, Jordan Peterson, sort of the bedrock of his thesis for men and the betterment of their lives is predicated on what you're presenting here, and that is that man without purpose is very dangerous, and in every man's life, the journey to wisdom and purpose, a man must travel through cynicism and discouragement first, and then from there make a decision about what they're going to do with their life with that discouragement. You can either become a cynic, you can become hardened, because on a long enough timeline, somebody in your life is going to betray you. The naivety of youth is going to be washed away. You're going to realize the world is a hard place, and definitely, you are going to betray yourself. And when a man betrays himself or the world betrays him, you can become a hardened cynic and bitter and angry. And one of the points that I think we've been making is this is dangerous not only to yourself, but because it incapacitates you as a child of God. It's going to affect the people around you. I've seen this with the managers at work who have made wrong decisions and they go home and they're an alcoholic, or their marriage is in shambles because they're a bad husband or a bad wife, or what have you. And so what have they done? They've stooped in their cynicism and they become bitter about what it means to be alive and your purpose for living. Now, how do you overcome that but to realize I have a divine purpose, and it starts with my family and my community and the people around me, and the small things I do can have a profound impact on the world. And so, yes, it leads to defeat, not to dispel Mike Ryan's point that it's reversed, but I think the pinnacle of the pyramid is true defeat and corrosion of the soul by such magnitude that you put yourself in hell. And it starts with something as simple as discouragement. And I don't think that's blowing it out of proportion in any way, shape, or form. It's a true thing that every human deals with.
Okay, next week we'll be talking about bitterness and resentment. So that's just what David said there. That's our class. No, I mean that's a perfect comment. I mean that's it. That's it in a nutshell. That's it on a postage stamp. Yes, sir.
Yes, one thing that I've learned actually through personal study as well as actual experience, but we have to understand emotions are contagious. They just do. You ever gone to a funeral and you don't know the deceased, but you know that somebody of the family, but it's a sad experience. When you are dwelling in that pyramid at whatever stage that you're in, I kind of like your pyramid. I'm sorry, Mike.
Thank you.
You did a good job. We're affecting other people. Now, one of our primary roles as Christians in this life, as the sons of God and to follow in the steps of the Son of God, is to influence people positively. But if you're dwelling in that pyramid, what are you doing? Your own soul's rotting, and you're causing rot in other people's lives. So you're going to have to cling to biblical principles and the promises of God and get to work as well. It's not just let go and let God. You've got to do something as well. Pray on it, and but cling to the scriptures and pull yourself out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
The exchange between you and Mike, as funny as it was, kind of reminded me just kind of a micro example of what happens, I feel like, to many people is like they work really hard on something, they invest, and then it wasn't good, and like whether it's grades in a class or you're in the workplace and you you invest all that time and energy. As Alex said from the beginning, we spend what percentage of a large percentage of our time working. And so if you're working real hard and you kind of lose track of the fact that why you're working hard, like you're working hard for God to please him, instead if you feel like you're working hard for your own self, for your own advancement, or for, then all of a sudden when things don't work how you hoped they would, it becomes really hard to cope with that. because that's where your hope was. It was on that, and it's easy for that to happen because, again, you're spending so much time in it, right? You can get sucked into that as being like your purpose.
Yeah, and I think that's a good comment, because as Christians, of all people, we ought to be able to see that. We ought to be able to turn things around. But perfect example of us being geared towards the same mindset as this world was when I asked the question about how our behavior is reflected in adversity. Not one person said anything about the positive side of that. And so we do have to step back and think, okay, and some people do. Some people are really successful at doing that and turning things around, but how can I make this a positive thing? What do I need to change in me in order to make this a positive thing so that I don't work up that pyramid to discouragement and then bitterness to where it's more and more difficult to turn things around? Yeah, excellent point. Okay. Biblical examples of people who faced adversity in the Bible. Esther. Yes, certainly. Yeah, you think that was easy? An easy thing to do? Some of these things in the Bible, they're just movie-worthy material, novel-worthy material. They're just, when you look at the emotions and what she overcame and putting her life on the line, absolutely.
I've been thinking a lot in this conversation about the story of Elijah, defeating the prophets of Baal and Mount Carmel, and then instantly his life's on the line again. Jezebel wants to kill him. All this hard work he put in seemingly did nothing. So he runs to Mount Sinai, and he's basically pouting before God. He asks actually for his life to be taken from him. And he says, I'm the only one. I'm not doing any good, all this stuff. And so I was thinking about that, especially the comments about, is it wrong to be in discouragement? Well, Elijah found himself there, but as we've said, it's okay, but where do you go from there? And so in the kind of the pit of Elijah's discouragement, God does comfort him and reminds him of some things. He actually tells him something he doesn't know. There's 7,000 and others that, so widens his perspective a little bit. The thing I love about that story is that really what God says is, I have work for you to do. And at the end of that, he says, go anoint this person, go anoint this person, go anoint this person. It's like, okay, just get up and do the work that I've given you to do. And as much as we need the comfort of God's promises, and we do need other people, he's given Elisha in that story to be his companions, and we need all of that. But oftentimes what we need is just to get up the next day and do the work. And that itself is often the cure for the discouragement that we're facing.
Yeah, don't give up. A lot of what I've seen that is, if you do the opposite of what you are to someone else, if you're discouraged, build someone else up. If you're sad, make someone else happy. That can help pull you out. But just getting up the next day and getting back in the fight and not letting yourself get down, which is so easy to do. Yes, sir.
Oh yeah, to answer your question, I would venture to say every person in the Bible that's mentioned suffered adversity, from Moses to the prophets, the apostles, and certainly, of course, Jesus Christ. But what I think is interesting is use a comparative, and the two I would grab would be King Saul and King David. Both of them sinned, and both of them suffered for their sins, but look at the different outcomes between the two men. One man's heart belonged to God, and the other man's didn't. So it's how you deal with your adversity, particularly if you are a man of God.
Yeah, and that's what the Bible is, isn't it? It's a book of examples, among other things, for us to pattern our lives after. How far along are we in class? I don't want to back myself into a corner. We have 10 minutes? 10 minutes? Okay. All right. Yeah, the Bible is just a book of examples of people, how they dealt with adversity. So I'm going to move on here to picking out just 3 examples that we can analyze to put a plan together to defend ourselves. I don't think God wants us to be discouraged. I don't think He wants us to be angry. But staying in that state of discouragement can cause us to sin if we're not able to pull ourselves out of it. And this is one verse that kind of sets my expectation of what God has for us in Proverbs 24:10. If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. It's small. And so the expectation is there that our strength is to increase over time as we face these adversities. So I think that's an expectation. And you talk about David, thankfully, I think David kind of turned himself around at times and encouraged himself through his own writings, putting it down on paper. And thankfully, he's done that because that can help turn us around. And I think he was a master at that. And if you look at God, from the beginning to the end, we have a God who cares for His people. And just a number of verses where He's saying, fear not. Cast your burden on the Lord. The Lord delivers His people. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden. The Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What can man do to me? Every good and perfect gift comes from above. And then a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. So He gives us people that can look at us. It may be hard to see when somebody's disappointed and discouraged because you can kind of hide those things. But if you see somebody that's bitter and resentful, someone that's depressed, or someone that's just defeated, that's an opportunity for us to step in because we're not immune from those types of things. All right, so let's look at Job and what he suffered. To the best that I could tell, in a 24-hour period, he lost 7 sons, 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep burned up, 3,000 camels stolen by the Chaldeans, 500 yoke of oxen stolen by the Sabaeans, 500 female donkeys stolen by the Sabaeans as well. He was the greatest of all people of the East as far as wealth goes. He went through all of that. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that's probably worse than what we could ever experience in a 24-hour period. I'm just going to say that. Feel confident in that. But what was Job's response? This was Job's response. After that had happened, immediately when he found out, Joseph arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, fell on the ground, and he worshiped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all of this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. So that was Job's perspective. The next person that I had was Joseph. Joseph was removed from his father, sold into slavery, and even in verse 21 of Genesis 45, it says, then, this is the brother speaking, then they said one to another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw his anguish. So he was in anguish. Joseph was in anguish when all this was going on. He pleaded with us, and we would not hear him. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. So, it's just hard for me to wrap my arms around Job and around Abraham and around Joseph. But at the age of 30, Pharaoh had risen after being put in prison by Potiphar for the challenges there. He says, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all of the land of Egypt. He's not Egyptian. Nobody moves unless he gives the order to move. So I can't help but think that all of the adversity that he faced prepared him for that job at the age of 30. Can't imagine being second in command of a country like that at the age of 30. But this was his response. But now, do not therefore be grieved. He's talking to his brothers. After he really struggled, he had to leave the room several times because he was so upset and touched. But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. And I know we're all familiar with that passage, but to be able to have that perspective after what you went through with these people that put you through that you could easily blame for that, this is the outcome that you come away with. And then one last example is Paul. Now, we've had rough days, but this is pretty rough over the lifetime. 5 times he received 40 stripes, save 1. 3 times beaten with rods, once stoned, 3 shipwrecks, was in the water a night and a day. in perils of robbers, perils of his own countrymen, perils of the Gentiles, perils in the city, perils in the wilderness, perils in the sea, perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil and sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. And if anybody had the opportunity or the justification to be defeated, that's it. But this is Paul's response. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, what's light affliction? All this stuff that I just talked about, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So that's Paul's response to adversity. And so just, in the defense phase, putting together a plan of these three people, and there are a number of others that we could look at. Job turned to God. He didn't blame God. He worshiped God. He knew God was in control of the plan. And you look at Joseph, what do you take away from that? Adversity gave strength to do a hard job at the age of 30. He didn't try to get even. And boy, it would have been so easy. And you can tell maybe he was right on the verge of that with some of the things he did, but he didn't. He took care of his family rather than taking it out on his family. He knew God was in control of the plan. And then Paul, affliction was light compared to the eternal weight of glory. The affliction was temporary compared to eternal life. And as all of them, they knew God was in control of the plan. They couldn't have made it to where they were or accomplished what they had done without God being in control of the plan. And another passage that we're all familiar with, 2 Corinthians 4, starting in verse 8. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, the life of Jesus, that the life of Jesus may also be manifest in our body. And I thought this was a very similar response to the three people that we mentioned here in Habakkuk, where it says, though the fig tree may not blossom, nor the fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. And it goes back to the other lessons that we've talked about and we've discussed, where it's reliance upon the Lord and His plan. And we know what we can expect from the Lord as far as food and clothing, and everything else is temporary compared to eternity, and that's where our heart needs to be. And I'll leave you with that, unless there are any final comments. Okay, thank you. We'll see you on Wednesday.